The deep, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator vibrates through the floorboards of our darkened kitchen, a steady, mechanical heartbeat that underscores the absolute stillness of the midnight hour. Outside our windows, the city has finally surrendered its frantic daytime velocity, settling into a quiet interlude marked only by the distant, low-frequency rumble of a late-night street sweeper or the occasional hiss of a lone vehicle cutting through the damp asphalt down below. Inside our rooms, the air is perfectly conditioned, held at a static, unyielding temperature that insulates us from the raw unpredictability of the natural world. We sit in the soft, deep shadows of our living spaces, our eyes unconsciously drawn to the cold, blue indicator lights of our charging smartphones, tablets, and laptops, glowing beacons of a digital architecture that never sleeps. On the table beside us sits a glass of clean, filtered water, its surface completely undisturbed, mirroring the absolute stability of the physical room we inhabit. By all objective measures, we are entirely safe, entirely provided for, and entirely unthreatened in this immediate second. Our rent is paid. Our loved ones are asleep in the next room, their steady breathing creating a soft chorus of domestic peace, and our bodies are supported by the ergonomic contours of modern engineering. Yet, if we tune our awareness into the deeper currents of our inner landscape, we discover an astonishing and exhausting paradox. We are not at peace. We are sitting in a fortress of comfort, yet our internal atmosphere feels like a command center on the eve of a catastrophic invasion. We look out through the double-paned glass at the silent city skyline, our bodies heavy with a profound systemic weariness that sleep seems utterly powerless to cure. It is a unique kind of fatigue that characterizes our modern lives, an exhaustion that does not stem from physical labor or the burning of muscular tissue, but rather from a state of permanent, hypervigilant mobilization. We are safe tonight, but our minds have already traveled months, years, and decades into the horizon, constructing elaborate, high-definition scenarios of our own ruin. We sit in the quiet of our homes, yet we are actively engaged in a silent, exhausting war against an army of ghosts. We are checking the perimeters of our lives, auditing our stability, and scanning the darkness for the first subtle signs of the inevitable collapse. We are healthy right now, in this very heartbeat, but our minds are busy replaying the hypothetical conversation we will have with an oncologist when the body eventually fails. We are loved right now, surrounded by people who choose our company, yet our inner narrative is meticulously rehearsed for the day the love cools, the partner walks away, and the betrayal is finalized. We have enough money to buy groceries tomorrow, yet our internal calculator is frantically running projections of economic ruin, hyperinflation, and the terrifying humiliation of public scarcity. We belong to a culture that has elevated the concept of preparation into a supreme moral virtue. We are trained from our earliest days to anticipate, to forecast, to mitigate risk, and to build complex insurance policies against every conceivable variable of existence. This habit of mind, while highly effective for corporate strategy or engineering projects, has broken through its systemic boundaries and colonized the deepest, most delicate chambers of our emotional lives. We have become meticulous archivists of anticipated grief. We tell ourselves that this constant mental rehearsal of tragedy is an act of supreme intelligence and emotional maturity. We call it prudence, we call it being realistic, we call it protecting ourselves. We operate under the deep subconscious delusion that if we can perform the emotional labor of mourning our losses before they actually occur, we can somehow inoculate our hearts against the raw, shattering impact of the real blow when it finally falls. We believe that by tasting the bitterness of death, abandonment, and failure in small, controlled daily doses, we can build a tolerance that will save us from being broken. But if we look honestly at the immediate quality of our presence in this room, we can see the devastating, self-inflicted violence of this strategy. In our desperate attempt to insulate ourselves from future sorrow, we are systematically poisoning the only living second we actually possess. We are refusing to inhabit our health because we are so busy pre-mourning our sickness. We are pulling away from the raw, vibrant intimacy of our relationships because we are terrified of the space that will be left when the person dies or leaves. We look at the beautiful, innocent face of a sleeping child, or a partner, or an aging parent, and instead of flooding our awareness with the immense, unadorned privilege of their immediate presence, our chest tightens as our mind slips into a high-definition movie of their funeral. We have turned our current life into a cemetery of unhappened tragedies, walking among the headstones of events that have not been born, weeping over corpses that are still warm, breathing, and looking to us for connection. We are so consumed by the heavy, waterlogged weight of the next year, the next decade, and the final hour, that we have become completely unavailable to the miraculous, fleeting sweetness of the life that is begging for our attention right now. We are like a traveler who has walked through a long, sun-scorched desert, his throat cracked and bleeding from days of absolute deprivation. Suddenly he stumbles into a hidden canyon and finds himself standing over an abundant, bubbling spring of pure, sweet water. The water is cool, it is clean, and it is rising from the deep earth in endless, effortless waves, singing a song of total abundance. It is exactly what he has prayed for. It is the single medicine that can save his life. But as he kneels down to drop his bucket into the current, a sudden, blinding terror seizes his mind. He looks up at the distant mountains and thinks to himself, what if a great storm rolls down that valley next month? What if a torrent of mud and rock descends from the peaks, pours into this canyon, and contaminates this beautiful water with silt and debris? What if this spring becomes a pool of poison 30 days from now? Seized by this imaginary future catastrophe, the traveler drops his bucket. He does not take a single sip to cool his bleeding throat. Instead, his hands trembling with adrenaline, he begins to haul heavy, jagged stone slabs from the canyon walls. He mixes crude mortar with his own sweat, and he spends the entire night laboring with a frantic, desperate intensity, stacking stone upon stone, pouring concrete over the crevices, building a massive, airtight, impenetrable seal over the mouth of the spring. He works until his fingers are raw and his muscles are screaming with exhaustion, driven by the absolute certainty that he is doing something profoundly intelligent, that he is preserving his survival. And when the sun finally rises over the desert horizon, the spring is perfectly sealed. Not a single drop of mud can ever touch it. It is entirely insulated from the future storm. But the traveler is lying face down on top of the concrete slabs, dead of absolute, acute dehydration, having perished from thirst, while standing directly on top of a subterranean ocean of living water. This is the kinetic tragedy of our hypervigilant lives. We are dying of emotional starvation tonight, our hearts parched and withered by the refusal to taste the sweetness of our immediate reality, all because we are completely occupied with building concrete fortresses against a storm that hasn't even gathered in the sky. To observe this self-inflicted drought up close, let us look directly into the life of an archetype that walks among us in every office tower, every modern suburb, and every brightly lit supermarket aisle. Let us examine the internal framework of the one we might call the anxious archivist of catastrophe. This is a person of exceptional capacity, an individual whose mind operates with the complex processing speed of a high-end mainframe. They are highly valued by their peers, praised for their forward-thinking strategies, and celebrated for their ability to anticipate structural flaws before they manifest in reality. They live a life that looks, from the outside, like a masterclass in contemporary stability. Their calendar is perfectly color-coded, their investment portfolio is meticulously diversified, Their insurance policies are comprehensively premium, and their health markers are tracked via sleek sensors wrapped around their wrists. They leave absolutely nothing to chance. Yet, if we strip away the impressive armor of their external achievements, we discover that the anxious archivist is a prisoner of their own profound imagination. For them, every moment of peace is not an experience to be enjoyed, but a dangerous anomaly that must be investigated. When life becomes quiet, when the family is gathered around the dinner table and laughter fills the room, a cold, systemic alarm is triggered within their consciousness. The mind whispers a terrifying, addictive warning. This is too perfect. This cannot last. The stakes are getting too high. The further you fall into this happiness, the more it will destroy you when the floor is pulled away. Driven by this existential dread, the archivist begins their daily work of defensive pre-mourning. They systematically enter the ghost rooms of their future history, mentally staging the tragedies they believe are inevitable. They sit in corporate boardrooms while their colleagues discuss quarterly growth. But inside, they are mentally rehearsing the speech they will give when the company collapses, and they are forced to lay off their entire staff. They lay awake in bed beside a deeply committed partner, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of their breathing, and instead of resting in the profound intimacy of that shared air, they spend 3 hours visualizing the empty closet, the legal documents, and the silent rooms that will follow an agonizing divorce. They look at their aging parents, and rather than listening to the stories being told across the living room, they are practicing the emotional numbness they think they will need to survive the funeral. They have constructed an internal insurance policy whose premiums are paid in the currency of current joy. They believe that by keeping their heart in a state of low-grade, perpetual heartbreak, they can flatten the trajectory of any future blow. If they never allow themselves to stand fully upright in the light of their life, they reason they can never be violently knocked down. But while the mind is busy floating these abstract, protective scenarios through the theater of thought, the physical organism is recording this mental horror movie as an immediate, literal reality. The primitive, instinctual layers of our biology do not understand the concept of a hypothetical future. The nervous system does not know the difference between a real predator leaping from the brush and a high-definition visualization of an oncology report, replayed in the dark of a bedroom. To the body, every catastrophic thought is an immediate localized emergency. Let us perform a precise clinical dissection of this anticipated grief as it carves its architecture into our living tissue, tracing its map from the muscles of our skull down into the deepest chambers of our torso. Observe first the eyes and the delicate, intricate networks of the ocular muscles. For the anxious archivist, the eyes are never permitted to rest in a state of soft, receptive focus. Even when looking at a beautiful landscape or the face of a friend, the tiny muscles behind the iris are in a state of constant, microscopic trembling. The gaze is sharp, penetrating, and hyperfocus. It does not receive the world, it actively interrogates it. The archivist is constantly looking through the present object to detect the hidden threat lurking behind it. This perpetual visual scanning creates an immense, unbroken tension at the suboccipital muscles, those tiny bands of tissue at the very base of the skull where the spine meets the head. When these muscles are chronically shortened by hypervigilance, they compress the greater occipital nerves, sending a steady, dull iron pulse of pressure up over the crown of the head, clouding the awareness with an ambient, low-grade sense of impending doom that makes clear, spacious thinking completely impossible. From the base of the skull, this current of defensive mobilization drops straight into the center of our respiratory and digestive architecture, the diaphragm. In a human being who lives in a state of uninsulated presence, the diaphragm is a fluid, moving tide, dropping down into the belly with every inhalation to create a soft, rounded space of receiving, and rising effortlessly with the exhalation. But for the pre-mourner, the diaphragm is an iron plate, frozen in a state of permanent contraction. There is a cold, hollow knot located just beneath the sternum sensation that feels like a heavy fist pressed deeply into the solar plexus. This knot is the physical manifestation of the stomach permanently dropping, the sensation of an elevator that is continuously descending in a dark shaft. The upper gastric system, bathed in a constant bath of stress-induced acidity, becomes rigid and defensive. The archivist feels an ambient, persistent fullness or a subtle nausea, an internal signal that the body is completely unready to digest anything, not just food, but unready to digest the very life, the very beauty, and the very connection that is being offered to it. If we trace the current out to the periphery of the body, we find the unmistakable signs of a system that has been driven into a permanent state of survival. The palms of the hands are cool, damp and clammy. The blood vessels in the fingers and toes constricted by the sympathetic nervous system to keep the core blood preserved for a running battle that never begins. Look at the legs of the archivist as they sit in a comfortable chair. The quadriceps and the deep muscles of the calves are never fully relaxed. They retain a subtle, high-frequency micro-tremor, a structural bracing that feels as if they are standing on a vibrating platform. The body is permanently oriented toward flight. It is waiting for the floor to give way, waiting for the ceiling to collapse, braced to flee a phantom structure that exists only in the architecture of their projections. What is the underlying psychology that dooms us to this state of total physical occupation? Why do we allow our eyes to strain, our diaphragms to freeze, and our limbs to tremble for the sake of an unwritten tomorrow? The answer lies in the deep, seductive illusion of proactive desolation. The ego possesses a terrifying, perverted logic. It believes that sorrow is a fixed quantity that can be managed through amortization. It tells itself that if it can experience 10% of the pain of loss every single day through hypervigilant rehearsal, then when the day of actual loss arrives, 90% of the work will already be finished. It is an emotional layaway plan, a method of buying safety by paying in daily installments of misery. We systematically rob the present of its color to lower the stakes of our eventual vulnerability. We refuse to say the words of absolute, unshielded love to our partners because we want to preserve an exit path for our pride. We refuse to fully sink into the exquisite luxury of our current health because we want to remain acclimated to the dark. We turn our backs on our own abundance, looking out at the horizon with a cold, analytical cynicism, completely blind to the fact that our defense mechanism has become far more destructive than the tragedy we are trying to avoid. We are destroying our life in real time to prevent it from being destroyed by fate. We are sitting in a warm house, shivering with a self-induced frost, because we are terrified that the furnace might fail next winter, utterly unable to see that the winter we fear is already living inside our own locked and frozen skin. To shatter this frozen architecture, to unlock the iron plate of the diaphragm and release the suboccipital grip that paralyzes our modern lives, we must apply a timeless, clinical awareness to the engine of our anxiety. We must bring into the dark bedroom of our projections the razor-sharp analysis of the teacher who dissected human suffering not as an inevitable fate, but as a series of distinct, traceable mechanical errors. His insight cuts directly through the sophisticated explanations of our contemporary risk management psychology, exposing the deep, foundational delusion that keeps the anxious archivist trapped in their self-made tomb. He observed that all our pre-mourning, all our hypervigilant scanning, and all our ambient dread rely entirely on a single unexamined illusion, the fiction of the controllable horizon. The human ego possesses a frantic, insatiable desire to project its ownership, its management, and its structural certainty into a tomorrow that does not exist anywhere in the physical universe. We treat the future as if it were a solid, pre-existing terrain that we are marching toward a finished room that already contains our sickness, our loneliness, or our financial ruin, and we spend our present energy trying to send emotional scouting parties ahead to map out the disaster. But if we slow down our perception and look at the actual physics of consciousness in this immediate second, we discover a reality that is far more radical, far more dynamic, and completely unmapeable. The future is not a solid room, it is a vacuum. It is an absolute void that does not possess a single molecule of reality until the immediate step of the present moment drops into it. The mind that is trying to solve the problem of next year, or next decade, or the final hour, is attempting to solve a mathematical equation whose variables have not yet been born. It is running an engine at maximum speed in an empty space, burning through its own biological fuel, grinding its gears to dust because it is trying to manipulate data that doesn't exist. We are demanding that our current nervous system bear the weight of 100 hypothetical realities simultaneously, completely blind to the fact that life only ever gives us a single, immediate cross-section of experience to manage at any given time. We are collapsing under the weight of an imaginary sky, sacrificing the real, vibrant, manageable current of the living second to defend ourselves against a collection of statistical ghosts. To lay bare the immense tragedy of this strategy, the ancient psychologist formulated his precise diagnosis of the human condition through the understanding of the self-inflicted arrow. He explained that in this worldly existence, every human being is subject to the objective, unconditioned laws of nature. The first of these laws is the absolute certainty of impermanency, cosmic truth, that everything that arises must pass away, that everything that is put together must eventually dismantle, and that every form we love must change, fade, or dissolve. This is the first arrow. It is the objective reality that our physical bodies are fragile, that our relationships will eventually end in separation or death, and that our material security is subject to the shifting tides of an unpredictable world. The first arrow is sharp. It causes a genuine wound of sorrow. It is the natural price of admission for being a conscious, loving entity in a universe made of flux. When a loss occurs, the first arrow strikes the flesh, and the system responds with the clean, honest pain of grief, a pain that, if left to its own natural processing, moves through the emotional body like a river, eventually clearing the channel and returning the organism to a state of quiet equilibrium. But the anxious archivist does not wait for the first arrow to be fired by fate. Instead, they sit in the quiet clearing of their present security, look out at the horizon, and out of sheer hyper-vigilant imagination, they manufacture a second arrow out of their own quiver. They notch it to the bowstring of their anxiety, pull it back to their ear, and drive it deep into their own uninjured flesh, right into the center of their chest, while their life is perfectly stable. And then they manufacture a third arrow, and a fourth, and 100th, until their entire body is a mass of self-inflicted wounds. The second arrow is our refusal to inhabit the undecayed present, because we are so busy weeping over the future corpse. It is the voluntary, systematic poisoning of our own current vitality. The first arrow is what reality may or may not deliver tomorrow. The second arrow is the daily, hourly torture we inflict upon ourselves to ensure we are not surprised by reality. The staggering revelation that we must all confront in the absolute stillness of this moment is that our suffering is not caused by the fragility of life. It is caused by our refusal to live while we are alive. We are so terrified of the ending of the song that we refuse to hear the notes that are playing right now. We are so paralyzed by the eventual closing of the eye that we refuse to look at the light that is flooding the room in this very heartbeat. Let us return to the image of the traveler in the desert. standing over the mouth of the dry well prepared for flood, and looked deeply into the mechanics of his dehydration. He represents the ultimate perfection of the defensive ego. He has built a structure so tight, so concrete, and so impervious to the elements that he has achieved absolute safety from the imaginary mudslide. But the price of his absolute safety is absolute death. He has sealed the spring so effectively that he can no longer access the water that is rising from the depths directly beneath his feet. This is the exact spiritual condition of the modern pre-mourner. Our hyper-rationalization, our emotional insulation, and our constant mental rehearsals are the concrete tiles we are stacking over the mouth of our own heart. We tell ourselves that we are being prudent, but the reality is that we are performing a slow, systematic suicide of our own presence. We have insulated ourselves so deeply from the possibility of future impact that we can no longer feel the impact of current love. We have protected ourselves so completely from the fear of failure that we can no longer experience the raw, unforced joy of creative expression. We are standing on top of an ocean of sweet, living water or current health, our current relationships, our current existence. Our throats are parched, our chests are tight, and our spirits are withered because we have sealed the opening with the heavy, calcified stones of our anxiety. We are terrified of dying, yet we are refusing to live, caught in a kinetic loop where the defense mechanism itself has become 1,000 times more destructive, more exhausting, and more painful than any tragedy that could ever descend upon us from the unpredictable sky. The realization that our defense mechanism has become our primary torturer, that we are the ones pouring concrete over our own living spring, is the most profound and unsettling awakening we can experience. It shatters the illusion that our anxiety is a form of protection, revealing it instead as a structural prison that we actively construct, block by block, with every passing hour. But within this unsettling revelation lies the seed of our ultimate sovereignty. If we are the ones hauling the heavy stone slabs of anticipated grief, then we are the ones who can choose to let them crash to the earth. This unburdening is not an intellectual concept or a philosophical theory to be studied. It is a mechanical, somatic sequence that we must execute with the precision of an engineer, beginning in this very heartbeat, within the boundary of our own living tissue. As we sit in the deep quiet of this modern room, the first movement in the architecture of radical unburdening requires us to aggressively uncouple our mental narratives from our somatic core. When a wave of anticipated dread sweeps through our awareness, when the mind presents a vivid, high-definition image of a future cancer diagnosis, an economic collapse, or the silent rooms of a broken relationship, or habitual reflex is to enter the movie, we instantly follow the plotline, arguing with doctors, calculating bank balances, or drafting defense speeches for a future courtroom. This reaction feeds the fire, sending a massive jolt of adrenaline straight into the nervous system. To break this destructive momentum, we must cultivate a radical disciplinary interruption. We must turn our back on the cinematic projection in our head, refuse to analyze or solve the future problem, and drop our awareness down into the raw biological landscape of the body. Let us practice this direct relocation of attention right now. The moment the phantom image of tomorrow's ruin flashes across your mind, strip away the story entirely. Do not name it anxiety, do not call it fear, and do not try to fix it. Instead, track the physical signal with cold, objective curiosity. Where is the threat being recorded in your flesh in this immediate second? Bring your focus to that tight, hollow knot located just beneath your sternum, the place where the diaphragm has frozen into an iron plate. Notice the coldness in the pit of your stomach, the high-frequency vibration in the muscles of your thighs, the micro-tremor behind your eyes, and the tightness at the base of your skull. Look at these sensations as a scientist would examine an unknown energetic pulse under a microscope. As you look closely at this cold knot beneath your chest, you will feel a powerful, primitive instinct to flee from the raw sensation, to run back up into the head and resume the mental script, because the script provides a false sense of control, while the physical sensation feels intensely vulnerable. This is where the mind must be trained to stay with the burn. You must practice the art of softening the muscular periphery around the somatic core. If there is a heavy, crushing fist in your solar plexus, do not fight it. Fighting is just another arrow fired into your own flesh, another stone stacked over the spring. Instead, consciously relax the muscles that surround the knot. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears, releasing the defensive shrug that has kept your neck in a state of siege. Let your lower jaw unhinge, allowing your teeth to separate and your tongue to soften. Smooth the skin across your forehead and around your eye sockets, letting your visual focus become wide, receptive, and panoramic. By softening the surrounding tissue, you are creating an internal arena large enough to contain the tremor. You are saying to the physical energy of fear, "I see you, I feel you, you are intense. But I have enough space within my own body to let you vibrate without allowing you to suffocate my life." This structural softening leads us directly into the second movement of our training, the deep meditation on the total velocity of the now. As we stay with the raw physical sensations of our hypervigilance, keeping the surrounding muscles relaxed, an extraordinary cosmic secret begins to unveil itself to our consciousness. We have lived for decades under the heavy illusion that our anticipated grief is a solid, permanent monument of dread embedded in our chest, a dark stone that we are doomed to carry until our final hour. But as we observe the sensation with microscopic, uninterrupted focus, we discover that the monument is an illusion. The cold knot beneath the sternum is not solid at all. It is made of liquid. It is a highly fluid, rapidly changing storm of tiny, individual energetic pulses that are born and die in a fraction of a heartbeat. Watch the sensation closely from second to second. The pressure intensifies, then suddenly thins out the coldness, drops an inch into the intestines. The vibration flares up like a small flame, then fragments into a dull, heavy ache before shifting toward the ribcage. It is not a static object, it is a continuous moving process. It is a wave of energy trying to wash through your system, trying to clear the channel. The only reason it has remained calcified inside your body for years is because every time it began to move, your mind panicked, opened the archive of catastrophe, and re-injected the sensation with a fresh dose of narrative horror. If you refuse to feed the process with your thoughts, its natural lifespan is incredibly brief. Left to its own devices, a physical sensation cannot maintain its shape for long. It arises, it expresses its unique frequency, and if it is met with spacious, non-reactive awareness, it naturally peaks, dissolves, and sinks back into the great, quiet reservoir of your consciousness. You are learning to let the weather move through the sky of your mind without reaching up to alter the storm, resting in the deep, unshakable realization that you are the vast sky, not the passing cloud. This brings us to the third and most radical step in our mental architecture, the deliberate act of somatic surrender, the tearing down of the concrete tiles over the spring. This is the moment where we transition from passive observation to an active, courageous exposure of our heart to the immediate environment. To tear down the tiles means to consciously drop the layaway plan of pre-morning. It is the moment you look at the concrete fortress of your hypervigilance and say, "I see what you are doing. You are trying to keep me safe by keeping me half dead, but the price of your insurance is too high. I will no longer pay for my future protection by sacrificing my current capacity to live. I am tearing down the wall." You execute this surrender through the rhythmic discipline of the lung and the belly. As you inhale, feel the air moving deep past the throat, past the chest, driving straight down into the lower abdomen. forcing the diaphragm to drop and expand like a slow, warming wave. Let the belly round and soften completely, abandoning the rigid shield that you have held against the world. And as you exhale, imagine that you are opening the throat and the chest like a set of heavy wooden doors, exposing your naked skin, your raw vulnerability, and your deepest love to the absolute unpredictability of this living second. With every exhalation, you are consciously releasing the need to know what happens next. You are letting go of the illusion that your anxiety can control the horizon. You are stepping cleanly out of the archive of anticipated grief and allowing yourself to be touched, impacted, and shattered by the life that is right here, in front of your face, right now. This practice must be repeated not as a temporary exercise, but as a permanent lifestyle of the nervous system. Every morning when you wake up and the mind instinctively reaches for its data sheets, scanning the day for potential ruins, you must gently, firmly guide it back to the soft belly and the open chest. Every time you look at a loved one and the mind begins to play the high-definition movie of their funeral, you must fiercely interrupt the script, breathe into the raw, aching beauty of their immediate presence, and choose to love them with an unshielded, unprotected intensity, even if it ends tomorrow. This is the true definition of internal mastery. It is a methodical, breath-by-breath reclamation of your own vitality. You are training your mind to understand that your ultimate security does not lie in a frozen diaphragm or a locked skull. It lies in your absolute willingness to remain completely open, completely fluid, and completely uninsulated, trusting that the living water rising from the depths of the present moment is more than enough to satisfy your parched throat, no matter what storm is gathering in the unseen sky. As the final remnants of the anxious archive dissolve into the deep, unrestricted rhythm of our breathing, a new and unfamiliar landscape of consciousness begins to materialize within our living tissue. It is a state of mind that does not feel like the static, defensive safety of a concrete bunker, but rather like the luminous, wide-open clarity of an ocean cliff after the morning fog has been completely burned away by the sun. Look at the immediate physical miracle that occurs when the concrete tiles are finally pulled away from the mouth of our internal spring. The eyes, which have been strained for years by the hypervigilant scanning of the horizon, drop their fierce, interrogative grip. The tiny ocular networks relax, allowing our vision to widen, soften, and become beautifully panoramic. We are no longer staring through the world to find a hidden threat. We are finally permitted to simply receive the world exactly as it presents itself to our senses. The structural release cascades downward through the entire biological system, like a sudden, warm current of water rushing through a long-frozen riverbed. The suboccipital muscles at the base of the skull soften, releasing their iron compression on the nerves, and clearing the heavy ambient cloud of impending doom that has darkened our mornings. The jaw drops into an unforced alignment, the skin across the forehead smoothens out, and the throat opens completely, allowing our words to rise from a place of unvarnished truth rather than calculated self-defense, and the diaphragm, that great, central gatekeeper of our vitality, sinks effortlessly down into the soft basin of the lower abdomen. With every inhalation, the iron plate has melted. We are no longer taking short, jagged sips of air from the very top of our lungs. We are drinking deeply from the subterranean reservoir of life, allowing our belly to round and soften with an absolute, uncompromised trust in the ground beneath our feet. In this uninsulated state of presence, we discover an uncontrived dignity that does not require an insurance policy or a risk management strategy to sustain itself. We walk through the modern grid of our existence with an absolute bareheaded vulnerability, yet we are completely unpackable. We realize that the ultimate sovereignty of a human being does not lie in our ability to predict the storm, but in our willingness to remain completely fluid in the face of the rain. When the inevitable changes of life descend upon us, when health fluctuates, when contracts shift, or when the people we love move through their natural cycles of decay and departure. These events do not strike a rigid, calcified structure and shatter it to pieces. Instead, they meet an awareness that is as spacious as the sky, passing through us like wind through an open window, leaving our foundational piece completely intact. We have stepped out of the archive, burned the blueprints of our anticipated tragedies, and allowed ourselves to drop completely into the raw, unwritten reality of the living second. This was the profound, uncompromising medicine that the awakened one left behind as his final legacy to a restless world. He did not ask us to build permanent monuments to our safety. Nor did he promise that our material structures would endure the shifting sands of time. He simply pointed to the transparent nature of the container itself, reminding us that when we stop trying to freeze the river, we become the ocean. He showed us that the future we are so frantically trying to pre-mourn and manipulate is nothing but a phantom born from our refusal to inhabit the wealth of our current breath. The winter we fear is an illusion we manufacture to keep ourselves numb, and the sweet, living water we crave has been rising between our feet since the day we were born. The mechanical clock on our wall continues to count down the minutes of the night, and outside our window, the digital towers of the city continue to run their frantic simulations of tomorrow's risk. But inside the quiet sanctuary of our own flesh, the labor has ceased. The heavy stone slabs have been tossed into the grass, the mortar has dried, and the spring is flowing out into the open air without restraint, catching the soft lamplight on its moving surface. We sit in the absolute abundance of this unburdened hour, our skin open to the temperature of the room, our chest rising and falling with an effortless, unshielded majesty, fully alive in a universe made of flux. If the future you are trying so desperately to insulate yourself against does not possess a single ounce of reality until your foot steps into it, who is the entity that is sitting in this room tonight, actively dying of thirst, while standing on top of an ocean of living water? And if you were to completely abandon the layaway plan of your safety, allowing the heavy archive of your anticipated grief to shatter against the floor of this immediate heartbeat, who would you be when the morning sun finally touches your unprotected face?